Man has weird round spots on neck. When the doctors see it, they call the cops. Not many people truly like insects, and for good reasons. They're creepy, crawly, and they're just plain pests. But besides the basic reasons to dislike them, there's also a very strong reason. Some are quite dangerous to humans. These are some of the most notable dangerous insects in the world. The doctor called the police immediately after determining what was going on. Mark was just left without any explanation. The doctor had done some tests on him, and after seeing the results, immediately informed the police and ran out of the room, leaving him behind. Why did the police need to get involved here in the first place? Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell. Let's proceed. 40-year-old Mark was a single man. He had dated in the past, but it had just never gone well. He hoped that this time it would be different. He'd spent a lot of time preparing for the date. He really wanted it to go well, and it would be the first time they'd meet in person. But the next morning, he was sure he didn't. After all, what was beyond strange? He didn't want to pull her into it when he didn't even know what was going on. Mark discovered there was something strange about his neck. It hurt a bit, but it wasn't until he looked closely at it that he saw exactly why his neck was hurting, and it scared the living daylights out of him. What was happening to him? Something was very clearly wrong, but what? Mark thought a bit. Maybe some insect had bitten him or even crawled into him. Maybe it latched onto his neck in the night, but he'd never seen a bug do anything like this. Mark searched online and came to the conclusion that no bug had done this. It had to be something worse. The more Mark looked at his neck, the more confused he became. These weren't just tiny holes. He went to the bathroom and pulled out his tweezers, but before he could dig into his neck, he hesitated. He didn't really have any idea what he was dealing with. Doing this could make it even worse, but he still had to do something. Mark didn't like doctors. He preferred to take care of things by himself. He rarely would go unless something was severely bad, and as much as he hated the idea of going to the doctor, he knew that this wasn't something he should take care of by himself. In the meantime, the doctor told Mark that he needed to do something for him. The doctor told Mark that he needed to think about anything that was different recently that could have caused this, anything out of the ordinary. It would greatly help the doctor figure out what exactly was wrong. Mark agreed to think about it and hung up the phone. What could have done this? He didn't really know. Mark thought back over the last week. He hadn't really done anything too out of the ordinary. He went on a hike through the forest a couple of days ago. He easily could have touched something out there before. Maybe a mushroom or a contaminated piece of moss? That could definitely be an option, maybe. As Mark continued thinking, the hike didn't make that much sense. Surely other people had gone hiking on that same trail. It was a popular route. He wouldn't be the first person to be experiencing this. There had to be other signs. He decided to rule it out as an answer, but there had to be something else. It was difficult to think of anything that was out of routine. Mark was an average guy. He didn't do much except hike occasionally and go to the local coffee shop. He worked from home and didn't go outside that much. He really was a boring person. He still hadn't found his soulmate and was hoping this date would go well. But from the moment the date began, Mark felt like something was off about the woman. She didn't really seem interested in him. It was almost like she despised him. Looking through his messages with her, he could see more and more she didn't really like him. He'd just been a bit desperate and wasn't thinking clearly. Could she have something to do with all this? Mark couldn't see how she'd have anything to do with it. They hadn't gotten physical at all, and he hadn't contacted her since last night. She hadn't messaged him either. If she had done something, wouldn't she have said something? Mark wasn't sure, but it was time for his appointment. He had to go. Everyone there collectively agreed that Mark should be seen first. None of their problems were serious, but Mark's clearly was. Mark was a bit put off by this, but thanked them nonetheless. It didn't even hurt when the doctor pushed on it. This was a bad sign. The doctor continued to investigate Mark's neck. When he first got the results back, he was disappointed. The test he had ordered hadn't found anything yet. There were still some others he could have done, but he needed Mark's permission. It would take up a lot of Mark's time. What would he do? He opened it eagerly, hoping that it was the answer he'd been seeking. In addition to his luck, it was. But it was also terrible news, and everything would have to change fast. Mark returned from the bathroom. His neck was not looking good. The holes were starting to spread to the rest of his hand. The door he'd just come through had been locked from the outside. He was trapped. And to make things even worse, he could hear the doctor telling others that he'd called the police. What was happening? Mark begged for an explanation through the door, but no one was talking to him. All the nurses and doctors were frantically talking to each other, and nobody was answering his questions. He was desperate to get out. The doctors on the other side were yelling at him to stop, but Mark couldn't hear them over his own banging. He was determined to get out. The doctor pointed at Mark and started screaming at him. All three officers took out their pistols and aimed them carefully at Mark, who was feeling faint. What the heck was going on? Luckily for Mark, the bad date hadn't been the cause of all this. Instead, it was more likely he touched some sort of infected insect while out on his hike. But which one? Mark wasn't sure what to tell them. Luckily, the hospital had the medication they needed, but he'd have to be in isolation for a while. The police had gotten involved because they needed to talk to Mark about his height. Mark was transported safely to a better hospital where he could be in isolation and get treatment for the virus eating his hand away. Fortunately, the medication paused the virus from spreading, and within a few days it started reversing the problem. But what about the insect? The officers had kept everyone off the trail, and after some heavy searching, had found an insect that wasn't native to the area. It was tested and found to be the cause of Mark's problem. It was uprooted and disposed of. There haven't been any cases since. And within a month, Mark was completely better and ready to go on dates again. What did you think of this story?